Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the gathering. It's so good to have you here. My name is Matt Miofsky. I'm the lead pastor here at this church, and we're really honored to be a sponsor for Carver and a host for tonight's Carver Conversation. If you've never been here in our space before, welcome. It's really good to have you here. And I don't know, as the rain continues to fall and the waters continue to rise, we may be spending the night, lock-in tonight, maybe, if it floods us in. But if not, we'll be done by 8:30. But it's really good to have you all here tonight. I'm going to open us in prayer so we can get started. So will you pray with me? Holy One, we're grateful for time and space set apart for you to do more in us so that you can do more through us in the churches, the schools, the universities, the workplaces that we inhabit. And so I pray that you would bless this conversation, the panelists who've given their time and travel to be here with us. May this conversation stir our minds to better thoughts, our hearts to greater love, our hands to nobler action on your behalf in the world. It's in Jesus' name that we gather and in his name that we pray. Amen.
Hello, folks. How are you? Is this thing on? All right. It's good to see you all here this evening. It's a lovely, beautiful night to be out. I'm so glad you chose us. Of all the places you might shelter, it's a wonderful shelter. And it's lovely to see you here. It's my job, very simply, to introduce this event and get out of the way. And I'm happy to do that, and also happy to get out of the way. First of all, I want to thank Matt Miofsky and Tim Melton and Tim Ziegler and Beth McClure and the entire staff of the gathering and all the volunteers. This is an incredible space. They've hosted us for many years now, and every time we're just marvel at how beautifully it's run, how hospitable they are, how generous they are with their time. And so could we just give them a round of applause for hosting us one more time? Just very thankful, very thankful. As most of you know, and some of you don't, the mission of the Carver Project is to empower Christian faculty and students to serve and connect university, church, and society. And that's what we do through a whole host of different programs. We have reading groups, we have speakers, we have faculty forums, and we have events like this one tonight, where we bring together speakers from lots of different disciplines and walks of life who all love Jesus. And our point is to get together and think about, what does it mean to love Jesus in this area or in that area? How do we do that well in this world that we're given to live in today? And we have a wonderful array of speakers for you to do that tonight, but we also have an incredible faculty of Carver Fellows at WashU who make up the sort of base of the Carver Project. There are now almost 80 Christian faculty members on our listserv. And at faculty dinners, there's always somewhere between 25 and 30 faculty showing up on these monthly dinners where we get together across all schools and disciplines to talk about what it means to serve Christ in the university and connect the university and the church for society. It's a beautiful operation, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of it. I also want to thank those who make that operation possible, which is Shelley Milligan and Louisa Wimber. Can we give them a round of applause, please? One other thing that makes it possible are the 14 church partners that we have who support us. 14 different churches throughout the city that support us on a regular basis, that give their buildings to us, their space to us, their time and staff to us, and many other things as well. And one of the beautiful things that we've seen about the Carver Project, which is a little bit too rare these days, these are not 14 churches of one denomination. These are 14 very different churches from a very wide range of things, all who love Jesus, and all who love Jesus and worship Jesus in their own way. And what we get to see at the Carver Project on a regular basis is how these very different churches can and do come together. This morning at the board meeting for the Carver Project, we had a beautiful devotion from Father Stewart of Church of St. Michael and St. George. And he read to us from John 17, and one of Jesus' final prayers is, "Make them one as you and I are one." It's one of Jesus' final prayers. What we get to see in the Carver Project is that oneness. We get to see that unity. We get to be together. We get to think together. We get to ask questions together about what it means to be Christians in the world today. And it's just a delight to be a part of it. I want to thank you for coming out. I'm going to hand off the mic now. You'll see a program here. And this program is very important. Not only does it have information about our beautiful, wonderful speakers, it also has a way for you to ask questions. There's 2 QR codes down there. If you get the wrong one, you'll be sent to a donation page. And if you get the wrong one and you're sent to a donation page, you're obligated to make a donation. You have no choice. It's the only way to ask a question. No, there's one to ask a question, there's one to make a donation. And your questions will all be funneled up to the stage through the powers of technology. And John Hendrix will be able to go through them later tonight and ask questions of the speaker. So without further ado, let me introduce John Hendrix to the stage, and he can do the wonderful job of introducing our speakers. So please, round of applause, John Hendrix. And everyone. Hey.
Hi. Good to be here tonight. I was going to make the lock-in joke, but it was stolen from me. We're here tonight to have, I hope, what is a very fun and interesting conversation. Phil, Jessica, Francis, thank you for being here. We're going to jump right into this, but I do want to set the stage a little bit to help us frame sort of what we're talking about. And you may wonder why these 3 people particularly might be on stage together. Well, when I was younger in the 90s in youth group culture, there was a lot of talk about Christian worldview. And it seemed like the Christian worldview was very clear, at least to me then. And one of the biggest sins that you could commit was moral relativism. And I learned that that was one of the worst things that you could commit, what you could do as a Christian. And yet today, it seems like there are suddenly multiple competing theories in the world about what it means to live the Christian life. What do the fruits of a Christian participating in culture, what do those fruits look like? And so tonight, actually, I want to unpack that question. Is the Christian worldview suddenly relative? And these 3 folks are going to help us do that tonight with 3 extremely different perspectives. Now, you may be wondering how we put this group together. I want to challenge that assumption that you were already thinking. What does Bob the Tomato have to do with mathematics or literature? But before we jump in, I want to remind you that actually all 3 of our guests tonight, what they practice is in some way an act of translation, of making what is unseen seeable, whether it's through the power of literature and stories in the Christian life, through the hidden patterns of mathematics, or through the beauty of narrative and stories for young minds. So let's jump in, and I do want to go and ask each of you this question. I promise we're not going to go down the line every time we ask a question tonight, but before we get too deep in the weeds, I do want to ask you guys, how did the gospel first reach your heart? Again, I don't think we want a 20-minute testimony, but maybe Phil, tell us how, Lewis said art can baptize our imagination, right? How did the gospel first strike your heart?
Yeah, well, initially when I was very young, it was through coerced Bible memory. My background was, I grew up in church, a small EV-free church in Muscatine, Iowa, where my mother led the choir and my dad filled in the pulpit if the pastor was out of town, and Awana clubs and potlucks and, the whole middle American evangelical experience. And so it was kind of assumed, this is your inherited tradition, deal with it. you will be following Jesus, and that mostly means you're going to church, whether you want to or not.
So parents, write that down, okay?
Yeah, so it's a good model. But there were a few things, as I figured out I was kind of creative and I would rather draw or build, than just like watch. Other kids wanted to watch TV, I wanted to make TV. There's kind of the difference. And when I was in high school, there was a short film, and you have to be my age to have any idea if you bumped into this. It was called The Music Box, and it was a Christian short film, and it was funny, and it was well done, and it was fun to watch, and I was just blown away because I'd seen some Christian filmmaking, but it was ponderous, because this is serious business. Jesus is serious, and we need to be serious when we talk about Jesus because lives are on the line and souls are on the line and this culture's on the line, so this is not a laughing matter. And this was a really funny short film, really well done with a gospel message. I thought, that's an option?
Is that possible?
Yeah, right. And then there was, in high school also reading Narnia. It's like, oh, wow, this is, I'm seeing an integration of my faith with creation, with creativity. And then when my first semester in Bible college, where I made it 3 semesters before being kicked out, was Steve Taylor, the singer-songwriter. His first album, I Want to Be a Clone, came out like my senior year of high school, and it was a satirical look at secular culture, but also church culture. Very funny, kind of sarcastic, which at that point I was not aware that was allowed. So it was kind of a combination of Lewis and Taylor and this weird short film, and then watching MTV, in high school when it first came on, and thinking, that's what is shaping my generation. I should be doing that. I was in a family full of missionaries and pastors, and I thought, that's where my creativity interchanges with God's love for humanity. And that's what I want to do. So it was a number of other artists that really inspired me to your faith is more than just showing up at Sunday school and showing up at church and showing up at Sunday night prayer meeting and showing up Wednesday night Awana clubs. It was more than just attendance. You could create.
So you want to make the next Phil Vischer, MTV, and Steve Taylor. Yeah. Yeah, go look up Steve Taylor if you don't know Steve Taylor. Jessica.
I was listening to you talk and thinking how parallel that is for me. It was more, I was drawn to Jesus through the things that I loved and was good at. So when I was little, I started reading and writing very early, and I knew that was what I felt like I was made for that, and to get to read and write. And I remember the first book that was not Christian that really drew me in. I was 5 years old, and it was that little golden book by Margaret Wise Brown where the bunny finds an egg. And if you remember this, and the bunny doesn't know what's in the egg, and so he throws rocks at it, and he kicks it over, and he rolls it down the hill, and finally he just gives up and lays next to the egg. And the egg hatches, and out comes a duck, and they become friends. And I remember being inspired by this because I thought, well, that's lame. I could do that better. There's...
Bad art inspires.
I thought there should be something way better coming out of that egg. And that was the first impetus I had for writing, is I could write something. And so for me, I remember staying up, 7 or 8 years old, reading the Bible. And it was full of surprises. And it was the stuff that I wasn't hearing on Sunday, because I was raised in a Christian church. But it was all this other stuff that was in there, right? Elisha and the bears. You guys remember that story, right? The talking donkey. To me, I thought, there's so much they're keeping from me by what they choose to preach on Sunday, and I'm just gonna find it all out myself, and I'm gonna just pursue this thing for all it's worth, and read as much as I can from it, learn what Jesus has to offer here, and then write about it.
Yeah, that's great. Now, as you know, when you have 3 humanities people on the stage, by law, we're required to have 1 STEM person. So, Francis, tell us how you... How did you come to love this strange thing called math?
But you're asking about the gospel, right?
Yeah, that's right. The gospel. I'm sorry.
No, my story's a little different because I didn't grow up in a religious household. I grew up in a small town in South Texas. My parents were immigrants, and it was typical it is often typical for immigrant families to really push education as being the primary goal in life. And I mostly was a dutiful son and bought into that idea, and it really wasn't until college, University of Texas at Austin. My first year, there were a couple crises that hit our family. My father got cancer. My mother developed Lou Gehrig's disease. And suddenly I was asking big questions about life and meaning and purpose, and asking questions about why am I getting an education? What's the point if all that happens is that we live and die and that's it? And so I was fortunate to have met some Christians in my classes. I remember in particular one of my friends who I studied with all the time, a rather meek fellow who had gotten to know. I went over to study at his room, and he was a physics major. Okay, so he. When I entered his room, this was in the mid-'80s, okay? This was like in the middle of the Cold War. He had this big poster up on the wall that was like a bunch of black and orange circles, okay? Discs on this, of the United States. There were discs all over the United States. And I said, William, what is that? What is that? And he said, that's the level, that map shows the levels of destruction in a nuclear winter if we went to war with the Russians. And I was just blown away by this picture because basically all of the United States, 90% of it was in black and orange, okay? And I just looked at him, I said, is there any hope? And this is probably the first time he ever attempted to share the gospel. He's very meek, but he just said in his own quiet voice, he said, not unless you believe in Jesus. And I was like, what? You believe, that kind of thing. And he gave me a Bible to read, and I didn't read it. And I didn't read it. No, I didn't read it. But it started the gears turning, right? And so as my parents' condition worsened, I started falling into deep depression. And so one night, I went on this long walk, and I was really depressed. And I came back to the dorm, and I got in the elevator, and two random people in the elevator started a conversation with me about Jesus. And that led to a conversation a couple of days later that started my journey. They shared the gospel. It made sense to me. I hadn't even read the Bible at that point because I didn't read my friend's Bible. But the way they described Jesus was attractive to me. It was good news. And so I started a journey of faith at that point.
It's great to get to know a little bit of your stories. I think we should make that a regular part of Carver Conversation. Okay, well, I wonder if my premise that these two worldviews that are sort of competing inside of Christianity, if that is something you are encountering regularly in your life. Jessica, I'm wondering, is that something your students recognize, or do you think my premise of this question even being valid, do you think your students would recognize that?
Okay, so after we've all told our stories, I don't remember your premise. So you're saying, so go back a little bit. Sorry, I need the antecedent to the pronoun here. So the premise of the worldview.
What are the two worldviews that are competing?
Everyone, someone explain worldviews to the panelists.
Get a handout that we didn't get?
You know what? I'm moving on. Actually, okay. So Phil, when you started, don't worry, Jessica.
You made yourself a target.
You're gonna have another chance. I realized I didn't set the foundation well enough. We'll come back. Phil, when you were starting Veggie Tales, did you have a missional mindset when you made it? Or were you just like, I just want to make insane vegetable stories?
I have to tell you, when I told my students that I was going to be on a panel with Francis and Bob the Tomato, and my students were like, "You mean like Jim Henson and the Muppets?"
They should have been raised better. Yes, I was missional in the sense that it was my mission to be able to make a film to feed my new wife and new baby. I also, though, was really motivated, like when I said when I was watching MTV and thinking, if every kid my age is watching this and thinks it's as cool as I think it is, that's really going to impact culture. So I was trying to figure out, I want to take Sunday school lessons and make them, not saying no Sunday school lesson is fun, but they're fun in the sense that they're making me be here and this isn't terrible, required attendance. But I wanted to try to make Sunday school lessons that you would actually choose, not just resent less because they're a little better than the other ones. And so there was that part of the mission, but I also just wanted to see if I could make something. It's like, I want to build houses. Can I build a house? Let's start there, and then we'll get to what's next.
But did you have a sense you were challenging some part of the church culture at the time by being a little silly or irreverent, or not really?
I knew I was being weird because I knew I was weird. So the only question was, do they like this or not? I guess we'll find out. So it wasn't a challenge as much as this is me. I'm exposing myself with a Bible story, blah. I hope they don't think I'm crazy. And if they do, I've got to go back to advertising or something else.
I mean, actually, Jessica, is it similar? Because I feel like one of your goals in life is for Christians to read books by non-Christians, right? Like, why is that an important goal? Like, how does literature do that for us?
Well, I was thinking about his answer to VeggieTales too. So the best art from Christians has been subversive. Because a lot of Christian art, if it's just patting us on the back, usually it's patting us on the back because we have cultural assumptions about what Christianity means that makes us more comfortable, and Jesus is not comfortable, and nor should he be, right? Like, if we're actually gonna grow and change in our faith and we're gonna become more like him, it means we're not like him right now. So anything that just lets us settle into who we are right now is probably not good art, right? And so when I think about things like VeggieTales or Dorothy L. Sayers' The Man Who's Born to Be King, where she's actually turning the gospel stories into a play, I mean, when that happened, the BBC broadcaster said 2 horrible things happened this week. And he said Pearl Harbor and Dorothy L. Sayers' plays. I mean, it was an insane perspective, right? I mean, he was not thinking through how good they were or how much they could change people. It was just, this is subversive, this is uncomfortable, this is, they thought it could be problematic, this could be heretical. But I think the best Christian art actually does challenge our comfort in the right way.
Is that something the church is struggling with now in general? Just the idea of challenge at all?
No.
Okay, moving on. Or maybe what's the appropriate level of challenge, or is there one?
Yeah, so I'm going to quote a 4th century figure here. But St. Jerome said in a letter to a monk, he said, if you think you're not being persecuted, it's because Satan already won in your soul. I mean, let that sink in. So the idea, he said, all Christians are really being persecuted. We should be. Either we're being persecuted from within because we are tortured by our own sins that we have to regularly confess, give up, let go, and let the Lord purge us from things that shouldn't be there, right? That's a kind of healthy instrumental violence within us that is cutting away the parts of us that don't belong. Or we're being persecuted from without because we're pursuing Jesus so faithfully the world doesn't understand, and they persecute us for it. But if neither one of those things are happening, then we should be scared about how much we've become more cultural than Christian.
Yeah, Francis, in your book, Math for Human Flourishing, which is an amazing title, you sort of talk about how systems or patterns can be applied to the larger Christian life. Can you kind of unpack the thesis of that book for us, just very briefly?
Yeah, maybe I'll say it a slightly different way, since I'm the token scientist on this panel.
I knew it. As I was describing, I was like, he hates this. He hates what I'm saying about this.
No. In some ways, the book is really an argument for mathematics is not being distinct or different from many of the other intellectual pursuits that we have, but actually being very similar. In the sense that I think all education, in some ways, is a process of formation. And I think about the ways in which when you, for instance, have somebody struggle with a hard math problem, you are teaching them how to be persistent in problem solving. It's building a virtue. And this virtue is going to serve you well no matter what you do in life. If you are having somebody look at and appreciate the beauty of a mathematical idea, that is disposing them to beauty. They are forming as a person an imagination that enables them to see beauty around them and recognize it, whether it's the beauty of patterns, as a mathematician studies, or it's the beauty of literature. Part of what we want to do is to activate the natural human virtues that God has given us, like imagination, like persistence in problem solving, like having courage to tackle hard problems, and take that to the next level. That's part of what we do in a great education.
Well, and one of the reasons that Francis and I kind of joined up about 5 years ago to talk about liberal arts and how we were on the same side of this was because I think too much in education we think utilitarian, right? How can I use this? So even the conversations about math, they're like, how can I use it? How can I apply it? And not thinking through the language of the universe that's there, that you're trying to discover, the things that you're trying to find, the things that you're trying to appreciate for what they are.
Yeah, and we tend to have a very reductionist view of the things we learn, right? Like, for a mathematician, or for people studying math, they often think math is just a bunch of formulas to memorize. It's a reductionist view. Just like, if you study biology or maybe history, people think biology is just memorizing names of animals, and people think history is just dates, right? Rather than memorizing dates, rather than being able to think about how you handle evidence, or how you begin to see large patterns in biological phenomena, right? So in mathematics, then math is not like the skills that you learn are not as important as the virtues that you build. The virtues that will serve you well, whether or not you ever take another math class, they'll serve you well no matter what you do in life, right? Like I visualize, I strategize, as somebody who's trained in mathematics, you're able to see the world in a richer, deeper way. And that is part of the argument for education forming us. It's not just for a college and career.
Yeah, in writing about math, Simone Weil says, the reflections on the right use of learning towards the love of God. And she talks about mathematics actually becomes a self-emptying process that imitates Philippians 2. So you empty yourself before this thing that you're attending to, and thus math becomes a practice for prayer, because you practice so often that self-emptying and that attention to the thing in front of you.
Simone Weil loved math.
Why didn't you guys ask me to collaborate?
Next time.
So it does seem like that there is a kind of new way to think about the Christian life as being maybe instrumentalized for particular goals. You were talking about turning something into an outcome, right? And it seems like there is a branch of Christendom now that is very interested in outcomes. And in some cases, just recently, there was conversation about how empathy as a Christian value is kind of flawed, is being weaponized to political ends. And some of that strikes me as a sort of stunning conversation for Christianity to be having. And it feels very different than something I would have thought 10 years ago. Am I right in thinking something strange is going on? Is this always been there? Phil, I feel like you...
I think there is always the tendency to say, how can we use people's religious belief to get them to do what we want them to do? You know, to motivate an end where religion can be a means. And if growing up, the prosperity gospel movement was very obvious. If you want this, do Jesus, because Jesus will get you to this. This is what you really want, but Jesus can get you there. And then with the religious right movement in the late 70s, it was, if we can organize all of this love of Jesus in one direction, we can have more political power. So I think there's always been, how do we use, and this is, I think, true of every major religion, there are people that want to use that religion as a basis to get what they really want, which is typically either power or money, or both. And what we're seeing now is, in the US, it started in the 60s, and it was just this crisis of everything is changing all at once. We got the sexual revolution, we got the civil rights movement, we got everything is everything. Detroit's on fire, and LA's on fire, and the hippies won't cut their hair, and the Beatles won't cut their hair, and John Lennon says he's bigger than Jesus, and everything is upside down. And that led to, this obvious backlash starting in the 70s of maybe we conservative Christians can't sit back in our churches, with our own schools, with our own Bible studies, with our own publishing houses. Maybe we have to take back the culture. And that has been, for conservative Christians, one of the dominant themes of the last 50 years has been, how are we going to take back the culture? And we are seeing that play out today in really aggressive, kind of extreme ways that are a little bit scary, because it often comes down to, especially in American context, America is supposed to be like this, like it was in my town when I was in high school. And everyone I knew was Christian, and we all went to the same church, and we all had the same values and probably the same color skin. And with so much change, with the immigration reform in the 1960s, through the LGBT movement, the civil rights movement, so much change that a lot of people are looking at Christianity as part and parcel with the America they remember. And we should be able to use Christianity as a lever to get back to the America that we want. In that case, the ultimate love is a forgotten America or a lost America. It's not Jesus. And we see a lot of that today, of competing narratives about, should a Christian dominate in culture? Well, of course, because we're right. We're the moral ones. So why wouldn't you want the moral ones to dominate in culture? And this is being played out now all the way up to the White House, where you have Paula White on one ear of the president, who's then going and asking for $1,000 in exchange for 7 blessings that she'll give you. So it's a really interesting time to see this tension over narratives about Christianity, and people pulling all the way back to talking about Christendom again. We haven't been using the word Christendom much for the last several hundred years, but all of a sudden, we're using Christendom again as a stand-in for what we loved about Western civilization that we've lost due to immigration, due to gender nonsense, due to LGBTQ nonsense, all these new things that have been invented, probably by Satan. And how do we get it back? And what levers can we grab onto to get it back?
And I think there is, of course, a motivation of fear that we don't see in Jesus' ministry, right? He didn't talk a lot about, hey, you should be afraid, you should be really worried about your children's future. And yet, I do really empathize with people who look at the world and feel like there is a lot of brokenness and there is a lot of lies. And so how should we Christians respond to that broken world? I mean, I feel like literature's got to help us here, right?
Yeah, so I don't know if I was going to think something literary, but I can definitely like go there. And I wasn't in the 60s, so I'm going to take your word for it. But I can at least...
That was a low.
But I can't, I think of the 4th century where this really did change with Constantine creating cultural capital to be gained by becoming Christian. Because before that, you have the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So the church grows by you dying. So the Christians weren't afraid of death, right? They would never think like you should be afraid for your children because they weren't afraid for death. Like it was the eternal kingdom that they were willing to lay down for. And then Constantine legalizes Christianity, and all of a sudden it's the Holy Roman Empire. And you have this conflation of like the church and the state. But this is always a problem. I mean, you look when King Henry VIII does it again and makes state and church a thing again. There's that really funny play, A Man for All Seasons. I'm giving you my literary reference. A Man for All Seasons, in which Thomas More is about to be beheaded because he's like, you can't do that. The church is the church and the state is the state. And so, of course, Henry's like, then you will die, right? But when he's
spoiler.
Yeah, I know, sorry. Martyr of the church. But when he's about to, he's going before the court and he realizes that his former student is actually perjuring against him. And Thomas More says, you will forfeit your whole life and gain the world, right? Or you can forfeit the world and gain your soul. And he looks at his student and he says, but you forfeited everything for Wales? Like a position as the Attorney General of Wales that you gave it all up for? I mean, it's this really poignant moment of just, is this worth it? And that's what I think of every time someone is talking about power in America. And I'm like, is it worth it? You forfeited your soul for this? Is that what we're looking for?
Why do you look at me when you say that?
In some ways, this is really an instrumental view of our Christian faith and our Christian practices, right? Like, how am I using my Christian faith to advance certain other goals? Rather than, it's very much similar to the way people think about coming back to mathematics or education, right? Like the idea that somehow it's only the answers that matter. Where actually, no, it's as a mathematics professor, it's not the answers, it's the right thinking, it's the process. It's being able to, in any hard problem, practice certain virtues that come about because we have a certain formation, right? And so in the Christian faith, it's very similar. Like this idea that you can't make somebody love Jesus, right? But you can prepare them. You can prepare the soil so that they are ready to hear and grab onto the message, right? That to me, that there's some sort of fundamental connection between all these ideas.
Well, and just jumping onto the virtues thing, this is so key to keep talking about virtues. I mean, a lot of people don't know what that word means, right? It's about human excellencies, and it's very different from values. Because values, you get to evaluate if it's valuable to you at any given moment. So you can change your values because it's about investing in certain habits of being that pay back. Does that make sense? So recently I was reading somebody, who's high up in power talk about, yes, it's valuable to keep peace. Christian principles are valuable, but if someone's bullying you, you should punch them in the nose and then go make peace. That's what values get you. It's instrumentalizing even the virtues into something valuable.
Do you think we're not talking about virtue enough in the church?
Yes, and especially formation in actual virtue, in what it means to be human excellences. I mean, our God is the human one, right? He's the paradigmic example of what it means to be human and be human well. And so if we're going to be formed into his likeness, it's not about just knowing the right things. It's not about just having the right values or the right answers. It's about actually becoming like him. That's a formational thing. That's a practice thing.
Well, that gets at the whole question of if there are two very different ways to understand the Christian story in this moment, isn't that an issue of spiritual formation in a way. Like how are we forming our souls in the pews, literally? Phil, if I can ask you to like actually rehash something you said on the Holy Post, I'm sorry, but it's really good. The thing where you talked about God's design versus God's grace, and that is an not easy, but it is a helpful way to think about how the church is debating what its role is in the world.
It was kind of off the cuff, so I probably regret having said it, and people took me to task right away, and Caitlin said I was a little bit wrong, my co-host, and since Caitlin's always right, that means I was a little bit wrong. But what I'm seeing is a group of Christians that are entirely focused, on one hand, on the love of God for everyone. And the core message of Christianity is God's love for you. And then another group that's focusing on, and I'm seeing the message being refined in real time. Because of the podcast, I have to pay attention to the news, and I have to pay attention to Twitter, and I kind of have to pay attention when people are yelling at me.
Jessica told us earlier she doesn't follow the news, so don't ask her anything.
Yeah, she does not.
Yeah, that was definitely pointed at me. I don't have any idea what's going on in
doesn't even know who the
events.
president is right now.
I heard there was a new one.
And he's fun. The other side is focusing very heavily on God's intended order for society. Who's supposed to be on top? What are the lanes we're supposed to be in? And it's gender, and it was race. I mean, you go back in America, and this is a big theme in America because unlike some countries, we started out as a plantation economy. At one point, the value of the slaves held in America exceeded the value of all the banks, factories, and railroads at the time of emancipation. So a big chunk of the American economy was a plantation economy. A plantation economy requires subordination of peoples. We were also a Christian nation, quote unquote, and so there was a dissonance there. There was a tension that we had to resolve, and so we had some theologians work very hard to resolve that tension so we could have our plantation economy, basically an apartheid economy, and also call ourselves Christians. And that was simply saying, well, this is God's design. It's God's design that some people are the slave owners and some people are the slaves, that you were made for the position that you're in. I was made for the position I'm in. And that we extend that to gender. You were made for the position you're in. And it's funny because people that look like me always end up on top, whatever it is. And we're seeing that a lot now as people are upset about change, is that we have to go back to God's design. This is the natural order. It's the creation order. It started with man, and then it was woman, and then it was children, and then if you want to be in the 19th century, you pull in the curse of Ham and say, and this is why people from African descent are in a subordinate place to people from European descent. And I'm seeing that a ton right now when it comes to the transgender conversation of that is not God's design, and we have to and there's nothing more important than us enforcing God's design on America.
But isn't the error to think that there's one of those that is correct and that there is some sort of both and to those things?
Yeah, that's what Caitlin said. She said, yeah, and God does have a design, and but we will, whichever it is, and we can do the same thing with grace, and all of a sudden no one's doing anything wrong ever, and all choices are valid because you are loved. So we can sin on both sides. Right now, and part of the reaction from the Christian far right or new right is the fear they see in too many churches that are changing their views on LGBT issues or changing their views on gender issues which goes like, should a woman ever handle the word of God in front of a man? Which just sounds like a ridiculous question to even ask, but some people are still very, very upset about it. And it all goes back to God's focus is telling us which lane we're supposed to be in. Like that's why Jesus came, was to tell us our lane. And God has a design. It is true. But that's not what Jesus kept talking about.
Well, he just never talked about like cultural dominion, like taking charge of government and politics. That just seemed to be
his
not
imagination wasn't big enough.
I heard somebody say the other day that Jesus is the only perfect character in literature who is interesting. Right? Well, that's nice, huh? Oh no, you're going to challenge us.
No. Actually, no. That's
and Jane Eyre.
It's actually really good because one of the difficulties is writing a perfect character, because most people can't relate to a perfect character because we recognize our own sinfulness. So the idea of having anyone perfect to relate to, it just doesn't work on paper, right? And so a lot of times you can't write a perfect character unless it's
I think you
God.
just proved that the Bible was divinely inspired.
It is. I mean, this is actually, like, the study of literature helps prove the design of the Bible over and over again, yeah.
Francis, you write that math actually, this was very helpful to me, that math is really about just posing really good questions. And I feel like that is something we can learn from in the church. Like, I sometimes I feel like we're not asking very imaginative questions with really the things that concern us in the cultural moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're referring to this, again, this idea that mathematics is about practices, right? Like, what's the disposition I have when I see something that I don't understand? Is it to dig in deeper? Is it to ask good questions of it? Or is it to just say, I'm moving on? Right?
Or I'm trying to get the answer. And if I get the answer, I've done it right.
Yeah, and the answer is all that matters. No, it's the process. It's the thinking, right? Right math is not right answers. It's right thinking.
Well, but like translate that to the Christian story, because I feel like lots of Christians would be like, no, the point is, it gives me the answer, right?
Yeah, well, so it's very similar in some ways. Now that I'm thinking about this, I see where you're going with this. This is a lot like the way we think about how one becomes a follower of Jesus, right? Is it that their heart changes? Or is it that you get them to do good actions, right? So one follows, in my experience, you really, it's hard to get people to do right actions unless their heart changes. And the heart change is the formation. It's the way of being in the world. It's the disposition. And the good actions then result, right? And the fruit follows from that. But it's not the other way around. The other way, you'll never get people to change their heart just by making them say the right things and give the right answers.
Yeah, I think that is really, really important. The validating of process and not turning everything into a means to an end, but that virtue, as we were talking about, cares about means. It doesn't care about ends, right?
Well, and that's why math is a liberal art. So it's an art that frees the soul, right? So it frees you to be fully human the way that art does, right? Art is not ultimately just about the product. It's about the process of learning how to see and to see what's there and to attend to things. So does math. So is music. It helps you hear the music of the spheres. It helps you pay attention, to attune yourself with your surroundings. Literature humbles you and it's a practice of art by which you get to then be formed in the process of humility. So all of the liberal arts are really freeing for the human soul, and they have these different means of doing it, but they're all aimed at that kind of freedom. That's why they're called liberal arts.
Yeah, I like the way that you sometimes talk about it as the liberating arts.
We were talking earlier about how the church seems to be struggling with who we honor and uphold as people, and we were talking about that earlier, like who are the people we are actually looking to that image these virtues, right? And how do we think about that differently, or how do we do that better?
I mean, I want to be like Bob the Tomato. So it was formative for me.
I guess he was a pretty good guy as tomatoes go. Dallas Willard taught philosophy forever and ever and ever at USC. And he said basically all philosophers and all religions are trying to answer the same question. That is, what is a good life? What is a good life?
See, that's a question the church should be saying out loud.
Absolutely. And how you answer that question will start to determine every decision you make. And if you look at, and that's why using the Bible as a reference book for making specific decisions, immigration policy. Was there a verse that I can twist to apply to immigration policy? Can I kiss on the first date? Is that in the Bible somewhere? And that was in my high school days.
I was going to say, that feels very personal.
Yeah, it's like, kissing, does that count? Can we, I will not continue that line of thought. But when you back up and say, no, what the Bible is exposing to us is the character of God as seen in the person of Christ, who is showing us a good life, and showing us a way of living in the kingdom of God by kingdom. Viewing, worldview is kind of a weird word, and it's
the 90s, yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, we were big on that back in the day. But everyone has a pair of glasses on that they're looking at reality through. And you use it, it's your interpretive lens. How do I interpret what I'm seeing? And when you really let the life of Jesus and the words of Jesus, completely submerge your thinking, your interpretive lens becomes like Jesus. And a good life is a Christ-like life, which is shalom in the true sense of shalom. It's peace, but it's flourishing. It's human flourishing. So you're pursuing the question, what does it look like for a human to flourish? And right now we're getting answers, even from some parts of the church, that are profoundly unbiblical. That we must have power, that we must have resource. That we must be in a position of privilege. How can we be Christians if we're not in a privileged cultural position? And you have something to say. I can. Yeah. No, jump in.
Well, everything you just outlined, I thought, okay, well, if we think about all those heroes, who are the ones who have privilege and power and so forth throughout history? Do you want to be them? Are we really excited when we look back at Nero and Hitler and think, man, I'm so glad they had power and privilege and used it well,
if you pick those guys.
But when we look at it, so George Washington, what did he do with power? He relinquished it and went back home to his farm. And then they called him up again to serve, and he relinquished it again, right? And how did he make those decisions? At Valley Forge, he had the theater play Cato performed because Cato was a hero. Cato was someone who refused Caesar, who refused that kingship, that kind of false power that you take for one person. And so he's seeing this and imitating this and deciding, I'm not going to be that kind of king. I will not be Caesar. But we only get the George Washington we have because he's looking at these models. He's trying to think like, who do I want to be like? Because that's going to affect how I live.
Yeah, someone asked a Christian political consultant that I will not name, but involved in the religious right, what about turn the other cheek? This was a secular journalist, because they were talking about aggression and meeting a strong leader who can. And the Christian consultant said, well, we only have two cheeks. Okay.
Math
rules.
I stole Jessica's joke.
We've lost the plot when we think that was the point Jesus was making.
Phil, you have 7 times 77 cheeks.
Thank you, and that's news of the butt.
Hey, I did it. A dream come true.
For those of you who have no idea what that was, I do a segment on our podcast, The Holy Post, called The News of the Butt, and half the audience hates it, and half the audience loves it and sends me more stories to use. And it all started because I learned that turtles can breathe through their butts, and I found that idea just so exciting that I had to talk about it to my Christian audience. And I said, and this has been News of the Butt. And then I was like, oh, I want to do that every week.
I'm putting this on my CV, that I've been part of News of the Butt. So actually, you guys were talking about, sort of outrage in a way, and like there are things to be mad about, right? How do we do that? Are we allowed to be outraged? Or should we intentionally try to not be that if we are feeling like there is injustice in the world, that there is broken systems? Do we just lament? What advice do you have for us?
Yeah, I mean, yes and yes. So I think I love this moment in the Anglican Church where at the very end we throw everything on the cross. So there's a cross in the front of the church, and we like throw all our fears and we throw all our anger and we throw it all at the cross, because I think that that's the right pose. It's not that you don't get angry. I think at this moment in Brothers Karamazov where the young monk Alyosha is actually learning to be a monk, right? And his brother Ivan tells him all these horrible stories that are really from the news that Dostoevsky was drawing on. And it's all these stories of kids being abused and kids getting hurt, and they're horrific. I mean, I read them every year. I know they happened over 100 years ago, and I cry when I teach it almost every time. And yet, and so Alyosha responds to it by saying, those people, those abusers should be shot. This is a young monk. But what does he actually do with that feeling that these abusers need to be shot, right? He goes and cares for the children that are suffering. That to me is the right response. You give the justice to God and you go and practice mercy. And so I think that's a good illustration of who do you want to be. I'd rather be him in that story than his brother Ivan.
Yeah.
Instead of tweeting, do that.
Was that aimed at me?
You're off. You're not on right now.
Outrage is a place you can visit, but you cannot live there. And outrage has become an economic engine in our culture. A lot of people are very wealthy because of the monetization of outrage. And it's really affecting people in the church that are being discipled by the media to live in a semi-constant state of outrage, which you cannot conform to the person of Christ if you're in a semi-constant state of outrage. You know, you read all of the writing about Jesus, and he's outraged for about that much time. Partly because he's never surprised by the human condition. And I sometimes wonder why we are constantly surprised by the human condition. You know, but to let go of that, outrage should immediately drive to love. It's like, what does love tell me to do because of that? Because of that, and move on and move on. And if it's something that's outrageous but completely outside of my circle of influence, you may just want to ignore it. You can't do, if you can do nothing, if you can't move on to love in action, then it's just, you're going to go septic on outrage.
And sitting in that outrage is a formation.
And that's just math.
We're mathing all over the place tonight. I was just thinking about Josephine Butler, because I read this book on the plane about the life of a woman in 19th century Britain who...
Seems like you read a lot of books. Is that true?
Oh, we learned earlier that Phil doesn't read fiction, so we...
You just outed him.
Don't spread that around. Oh.
Strike that.
Sorry, Mom.
But the book I was reading on the plane, she basically had this life that looked very active, and yet the whole biography was talking about how much she wrote on prayer. Because she said, if I constantly thought about all of the perpetrators, so she's fixing laws in Britain that have to do with women getting abused and sold. It becomes the white slave trade, right? Everyone starts to find out that these kids are getting trafficked around Europe for the sex trade in the 19th century. And so she's trying to stop this. But if she just gets consumed by something that really is horrible, nothing will happen. So instead, every morning she got up and prayed. And when she goes to Cambridge and speaks to all these young scholars, she doesn't rally them to action. She says, unless you pray in solitude on a regular basis, you'll be led into frenetic activity and nothing that God wants to do will be accomplished. Isn't that powerful? So the necessity of really putting those things at God's feet so that you can be love in action and not just consumed by hate.
So we've got a lot of great questions coming in, so I'm going to throw out a few here. So lots of people just really glad you're all here. But first one for Francis, can you talk a little bit about AI and how you think about that from a Christian worldview? Is it a tool? Is it a tragedy? How are we supposed to think about AI?
You're using that word worldview again.
So I'm a kid of the 90s.
I remember that. I remember that phase. I think I tend to wince at the term worldview because it implies that there's a right answer to a number of questions that are just very complex and difficult questions, and it's not necessarily clear that God's will for my life is I should wear that red shirt instead of that blue shirt. Right? There's not a right answer to that question. But there is a process. There is a way of being in the world cultivated by the Christian imagination that allows me to make that decision in different ways. And so AI is it's an enigma in many ways because the output of an AI feels very human, but it's not human. It is another thing entirely, and we're figuring out what it is. Does it have some potentially good uses? Yes, amazing uses. If you just look at some of the ways in which AI can help doctors make better diagnoses, how AI actually has helped people treat cancers that they thought were untreatable because AI is able to mine a lot of the information out there about which drugs have which effects, right? And so in many ways, I think a good use, a responsible use of AI is that it's a tool, and we have to steward it wisely. You know, in education. So here's an example. So I was just talking with somebody yesterday about who's an expert on thinking about some of the issues brought up by AI. And I love what he said. Like, so, you know, if we think about in education, a student could use AI if they wanted to look up, you know, help them understand, you know, give them a summary of, you know, the brothers Karamazov, right? It could do something practical like that, but it could also write your paper for you without you even lifting a finger or using your mind. And so what this person said that I thought was really helpful is that we really shouldn't be using AI to do things we don't understand. And I think that's actually a pretty helpful criterion to think about. Like, if I don't really understand how to write a paper, then I shouldn't be relying on AI to do it for me. And part of what happens is, like, once you actually have gone through the process of writing, you realize that writing is actually thinking and forming your ideas by putting it down on a page. You realize that actually writing is good for me. Writing is part of my formation, my growth as a person. And so then, okay, you know, now that I have experience writing, if I turn to an AI to help me do a first draft of some document, I can look at it critically and I can say, this part doesn't sound right, and this part is actually pretty good, and I'll keep that.
Again, process, not result.
Right, that's right, and being able to evaluate what an AI is giving you. And so, you know, I mean, do I use AI a little bit? Yeah, I do. I mean, I use it, but I use it with a certain amount of skepticism. Just like if I asked a person for some advice, I take that advice with a certain grain of salt, right? And I think that's part of how we need to think about AI. Do I have all the answers about AI? No.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, Phil, lots of thank yous from the audience for VeggieTales. Just wanted to let you know they're gushing about the influence that VeggieTales had on their lives. But a question to you, why does it seem that Christians aren't very good at humor? You being a notable exception, it seems.
Yes, well.
You have 2 hours. Begin.
In the past, I've had a really good answer for this question, and I'm reaching back and trying to find it. And I'm older now, so the filing cabinets are further from the front room.
I mean, you know what?
When, let's go back to the Pilgrims, shall we?
Wow, did not expect that.
Do we have an hour? When the Pilgrims left, okay, Great Britain has a lot of humor. Great Britain is a funny place, okay? Monty Python, lots of comedians, lots of just great shows, and in Gilbert and Sullivan and Pirates of the Penzance is absolutely hilarious if you actually read it. Brits came to form the US. We didn't get the funny ones.
I mean, case closed to me, yeah. Listen, Abram wants you to say Puritans right now, okay?
Yeah, the Puritans banned Christmas. So, and then when entertainment, so we were a nation of, religious refugees, basically, who were like, oh no, they want to kill us, and everything wants to kill us here in the New World, and our children have all starved, and let's put on a show. No, they did not say that. They didn't put on a show. When we finally got that, it was in the Industrial Revolution, and in New York City, in the mid 1800s, you started seeing entertainment because you started having factory workers who had downtime. And after the factory, they wanted to be entertained, so you started entertaining, but it wasn't considered an honorable profession. That's the problem. There's a good reason that 8 of the 9 major Hollywood studios were started by Eastern European Jewish immigrants. 8 of the 9. What was the 9th? The only Hollywood studio started by a goyim.
Big idea?
Disney, son of a congregational elder from Chicago. But the reason was it wasn't an honorable occupation to be in entertainment. It was tawdry. It was associated with vaudeville. It was associated with burlesque. It was associated with peep shows in New York City for the Italian and Irish immigrants who were working in factories and then getting their pay and going and drinking it all in the saloons. So if you were an upright, respectable...
It's literally cultural decay, like funny stuff. Right? Like I'm saying that's what they thought it was.
Yes.
Right.
White Anglo-Saxon Protestants had respectable jobs. Jewish immigrants were often kept out of the respectable professions, and so they saw the opportunities in entertainment and jumped into it, and then we all thought, oh, now it's Jewish. That makes it even worse. We're not going near there. So we just discouraged humor. We didn't pursue it because it didn't help in world missions, which we were obsessed with, and it didn't help with building businesses, which we were obsessed with, so we just didn't do it. And now when you try to get back into it, it's like whatever limbs ran that part of the bicycle have partly de-evolved, and they don't connect well.
I mean, this is your TED Talk. I want you to do...
So I blame the Puritans to start...
I'm sorry.
Is that okay if I blame the Puritans? No, I can't blame the Puritans.
Okay, quickly, before Abram rushes the stage.
That was just chapter 1.
Yeah.
No, I'm okay. And that's why Steve Taylor was such a big deal for me.
Yeah.
Because he was hilarious. And there was a bite to it, because I like David Letterman. But you can't be a Christian and be David Letterman, can you? Surely not. You have to be a televangelist. There are no less funny people than televangelists.
That is so true.
On earth. So
or not intentionally.
I have strong feelings about this, John.
Great question, audience. Thank you. Okay, this one's for Jessica. What is the book you tell Christians they have to read? Like, do you
Bible.
have one? Is it
Bible. Bible.
Oh,
Bible.
So,
besides the Bible.
I mean, yeah, it depends on the Christian. So this is where, I mean, it depends on the person I'm talking to, what they would end up reading. So it's kind of, do you guys remember City Slickers, that movie? Okay, and do you remember how there were the two guys on the rodeo trip that could pick the ice cream that would fit the meal? Like that was their talent or whatever. That's what I think my talent is with books, is that if I can talk to someone, usually for about 15 minutes, I can figure out the book that's gonna like speak to them. But I think books are very personal, and so to just kind of recommend one doesn't really work. But I love getting to talk to people and finding out what book would really speak to them.
What are your 3 most recommended books?
Well, my 3 favorite books are different than my 3 most recommended, because I really don't think I have just...
What are your 10 most recommended books?
So,
Give us any example of a book you have ever recommended to anyone.
So I have a book called Reading for the Love of God that has a bunch of books in the back of it. That's a huge list. That's like a 10-page list of
You're
books.
recommending your own book.
I'm recommending my own book that has a bunch of books in the back of it. But I would say The Brothers Karamazov is the greatest novel that's ever been written.
We do have books for sale by Jessica. Okay, here, this one, maybe, let's try another one with you, okay? So you mentioned St. Jerome's quote about persecution. In your opinion, how can Christians guard against thinking that we are being persecuted for our faith in situations where that's actually not happening and we're just maybe being unkind to people? Is there, where maybe there's a persecution complex, right? Is that, how do we discern?
Well, I would say, I mean, we were talking about this a little bit in the green room, so I won't mention like any names, but my greatest persecution comes from Christians. The people that attack me the most are the people who think I'm part of their tribe, but they disagree with me on something, and so they attack me the most. I mean, so I would say going forward, are we the ones persecuting each other? I would actually just start there. Like, how often are you the persecutor? That seems like the first mirror we should hold up. And make sure that we're not part of the problem.
Yeah, no, no, that's a great point. I was just in a conference.
But you didn't answer the question.
You did.
I did it right
really
that
well
time.
on that one. Phil, we got a question. Do you think you could make Veggie Tales today?
Not economically. In what sense? Technologically, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Way better. Theologically, sure. Entertainment-wise, sure. It's the business models that have all been destroyed. You know, VeggieTales was built on a day when people would pay $15 to watch a 28-minute story that they bought on a physical piece of media and brought home from a Christian bookstore. Okay, VHS tapes, Christian bookstores, VHS decks. None of those things exist anymore. So the biggest problem for Christian kids media, and this is actually the biggest problem for all kids media today, is that there aren't really any good business models for producing it. Which is why if you're watching if your favorite show is Bluey, if your favorite show is Octonauts, if your favorite show is Peppa Pig, none of those are from the US because we don't underwrite kids programming with tax revenue. Every other country in the world underwrites kids programming. Maybe not everyone, but most major Western countries underwrite kids programming with tax revenue because they want indigenous children's programming that's good for kids. We don't care. We assume that Disney, Nickelodeon, toy companies will make, you know, Paw Patrol is the only American-owned show that's really popular with kids, funded by a toy company, animated in Canada, because we don't do animation here, except at the very high end. So VeggieTales would be virtually impossible unless you went with like the Chosen model, where you start a crowdfunding campaign, a bunch of people chip in, you do a Kickstarter, and then a really wealthy Christian family decides, we will bless this with our largesse. And so it's more like, you know, the Medicis, where Christian creatives have to play golf with really wealthy families to try to win a patronage.
You do not want us to do that. Yeah.
I don't play golf. That's why I can't make anything anymore. It's become incredibly difficult to make stuff.
Well, that was the wing feather model that Andrew Peterson used. I mean, it was all crowdfunded.
Crowdfunding, and yeah, but it's still, it's tricky. It's real tricky. It's never, I tell when I bump into kids that want to make their own shows, I would say it's never been easier to make your own show. It's never been harder to make a living doing it. So have a day job with health insurance and make stuff in the evening.
Yeah, well, just real quickly, the animations you were doing before the election that you had done of the two nights talking about their sort of political engagement, what was the response you got to that?
Good. It was actually good.
Yeah?
Yeah, because I had a group, I'm taking way too much time, but I had a group come to us at the Holy Post and say, you know, Sky had written this document on these are 7 principles we think Christians should affirm in political engagement. And then a group with some money said, hey, could you, Sky, ask Phil if maybe he could make some animated videos about these principles? I was like, what? Huh? Political PSAs for kids? But I'd been playing with Blender. Blender is open source, free animation software, and I'd been trying to figure out how to do something that was more like puppetry than traditional animation, so I can go much, much faster. And so it ended up being a test bed for what I've been developing. Was 2 nights. The key was I said, can I take it out of historical context? Because if we're in an election season and we put out animated characters talking about politics. And it's contemporary, everyone's going to say, oh, is that one supposed to be Trump or is that one supposed to be Trump? And should I be offended? I should be offended or should you be offended? Because one of us is offended, or maybe both. And so I said, what if I take it out of historical context and it's 2 medieval knights sitting on the couch watching medieval political ads and discussing them? And it's just disarming enough that no one got mad at them. It was kind of amazing.
No, they were great. You should go look.
So that's my new job. I make.
Okay, Dr. Sue, could you share with us what you personally find beautiful and compelling about teaching and studying math?
I guess I love. I'm attracted to the a way of seeing the world that's different and surprising and wonderful. And I'll do a little demo. Is it okay if I do a demo? Yeah, just do a little demo. Like, one of my first experiences of mathematical beauty was when I was a little kid, and one of my friends was a math teacher, came over to the house and said, hey, Francis, can you add up all the numbers from 1 to 100? And I was like, 1 + 2 + 3, and of course I couldn't do that. And he said, no, let me show you an easier way. And so he said, imagine lining up all the numbers in a row, 1 to 100, and if you grab the first number in the list and the last number of the list, that's 1 and 100, they add up to what? 101. And so now if I move my hand in 1 on both ends, and I grab 2 and 99, what do those add up to? 101. And if I keep going and I just keep moving my hands in, every pair adds up to what? 101. And how many pairs are there if there are 100 total numbers? 50. And so suddenly, you could see the answer to this question is just 50 times 101, which you can almost do in your head. Whoa, mind blown. Mind blown. I didn't pay her to do that, to respond like that.
That was really cool.
I had that experience when I was a kid, and I was like, whoa, this is really cool. Like, the act of just thinking creatively and noticing a symmetry, in this case an anti-symmetry, suddenly unlocked that problem and made it easy to see. That's an experience of mathematical beauty. It's not going to float everybody's boat here, but I guarantee you there's some math cool idea that will float your boat, right? Like, there's lots of it's an ineffable kind of beauty that is really, as Simone Weil, it's like experiencing transcendence, right? That feeling that there's just something out there that's worth trying to understand. I mean, it's divine in many ways.
My first computer animation, I was in high school, and I just bought an Atari 400 personal computer, which was one of the really cheap early computers. And I was taking physics class, and I noticed that my physics book had math equations in it that described motion. And I wondered if I could plug those into my computer and generate animation. And it worked. I made a bouncing ball with my physics book open here and my Atari 400 right here typing in.
Yes.
And I was like, eureka, math describes motion.
Yes.
So what I want to do, which is make things move, bring things to life, math is going to be a huge part of that, and it has been ever since.
Yeah. In many ways, seeing the unseen structure of the universe.
Yes. Yeah. God speaks math.
Okay, Phil, we've got a question here for you. It seems like many times authors talk about their characters sort of coming to life in the stories and having a will of their own. Did you ever experience that? And what did Bob and Larry teach you that surprised you?
That they're fruit.
We're going to get aggregated.
That was upsetting. Seeds on the inside, baby. Seeds on the inside. When I write dialogue, if it's working, I'm taking dictation. You know, I'm not writing. I'm listening to the characters talk to each other, and I'm writing it down. That's a space you have to get into. It's just, it just doesn't come automatically. I don't know if they've taught me anything, except that people like the silly guy more than the straight guy. I didn't notice that. And that people like the silly songs more than the teaching songs, because they always come up and say, "Oh, VeggieTales, the hairbrush song." And I was like, yeah, Mike wrote that one. And like, "Oh, what? The cheeseburger song." Yeah, Mike wrote that one. He writes the silly ones. I write the ones that actually do the heavy lifting. So I don't know if I learned anything from Bob. It was more people's reactions to Bob and Larry, kids' reactions to Bob and Larry. Autistic kids respond amazingly to VeggieTales. It's the number of parents that said our kids' first words were in response to VeggieTales. Nonverbal autistic kids would start saying Bob and Larry. So it's just wild stuff.
Well, we're coming to the end here, but I would like to close with just from each of you, if you had to give some advice to people out there who wanted to kind of do what you do in the world, what advice would you give them? How do you start loving math, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us are already mathematicians at heart, and we just need to cultivate that, right? When my son looks at two different animals and says, "Oh, that's a dog," even though they're very different kinds of dogs, he's exhibiting a very human quality, which is to be able to say two things that aren't quite the same thing are actually the same, giving them a same name. That's called abstraction, right? And part of what we do as we grow in our mathematical senses is to pay attention to these things that are already within us. So I would say just cultivate an imagination, unlock, think about. If we're talking about math, think about math differently as a set of practices, and then it won't be so one-dimensional, right? It's not about speed, which everybody thinks it is, but it's not even a thing for professional mathematicians. It's about understanding the beautiful patterns that exist in the world and also taking responsibility for them.
If you're talking about being a professor, I usually tell people not to. So I do think that people should follow their vocation. To me, it's more important to listen to what God has made you for. So Phil keeps saying, I wanted to make things, and you've made all sorts of things. I think you have to listen to that part of you. So I knew I wanted to know Christ and make him known, and for me, it was through words. So what are the ways that my whole life could constantly be knowing Christ and making him known? And then the jobs or the different tasks he's asked me for have changed over the course of my life, and I hope they keep changing. But for me, I just keep that as the constant that I'm listening to, and I think most people should be doing the same.
Do you want me to hone in on like one thing? What's the...
Give us your top 10 advice on how to make an animated Christian show about vegetables.
Please don't.
Or fruits. No.
Yeah. Again, when I bump into people that want to, and it can be, I want to write a children's book. I have an idea for a children's book. I have an idea for a movie. I have an idea for a TV series. Can you connect me to Netflix? No. In general, it's just make it. Just make it. The barriers to production are so low. You can do more with your phone, than someone could do with a movie studio 50 years ago. Just make it. Distribution is free. Podcast, YouTube. YouTube is now the #1 TV platform in America. It just became #1 this year. More people watch television on YouTube than they watch all of Disney's networks combined. So anyone can reach anyone with media. There are dads, this is fun. There was a dad who was telling stories to his kids and kind of coming up with a character and a sci-fi thing for his kids, and decided, why don't I just record those and I'll just make a little podcast. And within a year, he had 100,000 people listening to these stories, and he had publishers calling him, saying, can we turn those into children's books? So the way to be discovered is completely different. You don't need an agent. You just need YouTube or a podcast and your phone, and you can be creative. And if you're gifted, the audience will find you. You may not make any money at it, but hopefully that's not the point.
Yeah, process, not result.
It's the process. It's not about
right.
eating or feeding your children. It's process.
Okay, y'all, we did it. Let's thank these panelists. It's been a great night. Thank you, Phil, Jessica, Francis. Thank you.
Well, thank you all again for being here, and thank them for these insightful and wonderful comments. It's such a pleasure every time. Stuff comes out new every time. You think, where did that come from? Or I hadn't been thinking that way before, and then you're sort of left thinking with it for a while. And one of the things that struck me right away from the beginning of this was the Phil's comment about MTV, because when I was growing up, I had two things I could not watch. One was MTV, and the other was The Simpsons. And I think it was because the early Bart stuff was just too much for my parents. But what I loved about that answer, and one of the things just to reflect on from this night, I mean, I heard so much of the language tonight was around formation. Formation, process. Let's talk about virtue again as a process of formation. And what you heard in the MTV answer and onward is that we live in a world of liturgies that form us all the time, whether it's MTV, whether it's children's books, whether it's the Bible and church and Sunday school. We live in a world of liturgies. And one of the things that I was really struck with and came away with, there go my cards, don't worry about that, is that you can't be formed apart from the world. We're formed in the world, and we're formed in part through a love of the world. You have to, in a certain sense, love the world if you're going to love Christ. And yet, if you're formed well and live in the world in a love of Christ, that formation is also going to form you to be somewhat apart from the world. And so you could hear that tonight too, to be in the world and to love the world, and through a love of the world to be held somewhat apart from the world. And so actually, I will say, I was thinking a lot about the Puritans tonight. Now, I study the Puritans. I think about the Puritans all the time. I had a friend who used to say, well, it's the Puritan fact of the day time. Well, here's your Puritan fact of the day. The first Puritan fact of the day is that the first Puritan bestseller was a comedy. So Phil and I need to talk. I mean, it was called The Simple Cobbler of Agawam. I don't recommend it because it's kind of mean and racist, so don't. But the reason it sold was because it was funny. That was the point. So, I mean, that was a Puritan bestseller. But anyway, the second thing I was thinking about the Puritans is that they were very, very good on the question of formation and on the question of the love of the world. And I'm working a lot on a poet named Anne Bradstreet, a Puritan poet from the early days. And one of the clearest things you get from reading the poetry of Anne Bradstreet is that she was in love with the world. And it was her love of the world that taught her to love Christ. So I'll leave you with this. When her house burns down, she loses everything. She's in mourning about everything that she has lost. She writes a long poem listing in mourning everything that she has loved about this house. She ends the poem by saying, "And yet I have a higher house, a house on high erect, framed by the perfect architect." So her hope turns to heaven at the end. But how does she know what heaven is? It's a house. And how is that a good thing? It's only because she's known what it is to love a house that she can look forward to a house that is beyond this world. It's only through a love of this world that you can actually transcend this world. And that was a basic lesson that you got out of the Puritans, and I think a basic lesson you could hear in the comments tonight. Look, this is a beautiful night. These are always a beautiful night, and these nights don't happen without some help. And so if you are one of those who has benefited from the many things that Carver has done, there is a way to help us continue these things, and that is to help us through donations. So if you are in a position and feel like you can help the Carver Project, there is a way to do so through the QR codes on the handout, on the programs that you've got. We basically survive through donations. We're not making a profit, nor are we selling any goods. But we do all that we do through church support and individual donations, and that makes a night like this possible. The next event that we are hosting for the public is May 29th at 7 p.m. We're going to have a panel of different people from different disciplines who study communication, and the question is, how do you communicate with love? And that will be a panel on May 29th at 7 p.m. One way to know about that and hear about all of these events is to be on our e-newsletter. So if you don't already get our e-newsletter, please do sign up for that. It has all of our events and all of our information, and that will come in your email. It's not excessive. It comes like maybe every 6 weeks. Don't worry about it. And meanwhile, please join us in the lobby for some amazing cookies, some coffee, some fellowship, and some time to hang out. Thank you so much all for being here tonight. Good night.
I've been to these events before, and my favorite thing is just to hear the kind of unscripted moments, to hear their conversations, the things that they weren't planning to say that somehow speak to me and are entertaining, but also really thought-provoking. And I walk away with some really good resources.
I was reminded of just some of the things that are important to me around making sure that I'm in the world and being formed into the image of Christ. And so that's the thing that's just challenging always, to kind of think about, what are we being formed into and what is forming us?
I think the connections between literature and math and how that affects how we live in the world as Christians was just not a connection I would have made on my own.
I really appreciated how it touched upon how media and all the liberal arts are really important for us as human beings to be more human.
I was interested to hear what they had to say about math, literature, humor, and I wasn't disappointed. It was great.